I'm Alexandra Baker, and these are my lovely bosses I've had the pleasure to work with, Cheryl Lockstone and her husband, Barrett Williamson. They're from Anishinabe Design, and today they'll be sharing with us what their practice does and the unique niche of their firm, especially with tribal architecture. So I'll just take it away.
Bonjour. Mino Wabinjayak. Hello, good morning all. I'm Cheryl Lockstone. I am the principal of Anishinabe Design. I am the majority owner. It's a women-owned business. I am not an architect. I would like to introduce you to my husband, Barrett Williamson, and he is the principal architect for our firm. In 2008, we combined Barrett's practice that he started in 1998 and started Anishinabe Design and started a partnership. And one firm dealt with non-native projects and our firm dealt with native projects. We are interested in the purpose of starting our firm was so that we could develop culturally sensitive projects for the tribal nations in Oklahoma. How many of you are a citizen of a tribal nation? 2? What's your tribe affiliation?
Choctaw.
Choctaw and? We've worked with both of those tribes. There are 39 tribes in the state of Oklahoma, and we have worked with 19 of them. What I'm going to go through is really briefly, and then we'll get into projects, and then we'll come back, is a process that we go through with the tribes. And we usually do some type of a cultural workshop so that we can develop the design so that it fits the tribe specifically and their needs. With only 2 of you out of the group being tribal, is everyone from Oklahoma? Who's not from Oklahoma? Oh, wow. Okay, so maybe short Oklahoma history to give you a background. The majority of the tribes that are in Oklahoma were relocated in Oklahoma. They relocated us all together probably because they thought we would all fight and kill each other off, which did not happen. Instead, we began to thrive. And there's been a lot of laws that have happened since we have been relocated to Oklahoma. In 1978, our tribe regained its sovereignty. So the 39 tribes that are in Oklahoma are sovereign nations. Each of the nations have their own cultural background in history. So my tribe originally came from the Northeast, up around the Great Lakes. The Comanche, they ranged from Texas to Colorado. Okay, Choctaw were moved from the southeastern part of the United States and walked on the Trail of Tears with the Cherokee. So each tribe has something that is prudent to their history. When we have worked with the Choctaw Housing Authority, what we did for them in our design was we went to their museum and we looked at their artifacts. And we found basket patterns and tile patterns were developed out of those. So on the basket pattern, we interpreted those on on a glass film down the hallway. And then in the bathrooms, we took the basket weave and put it in the tile. On Caddo Nation, we used a stone detailing on the exterior of the Elder Center. Jerry Redhorn, who is from Norman, Oklahoma, she's a potter, a Caddo potter. She has a piece of pottery in the White House during the Obama era. And she is also, if you've been to the new FAM Museum, she has a large piece in that museum also. So we took a design from her piece of pottery And we put it in detailing on the outside of the building.
Who's gonna get the size?
Yeah.
It may be out of order.
Okay, we'll come back to that one. Ponca, we're a teepee tribe. We did an abstraction of a teepee on their building on the ephes and repeated the pattern in the windows. Here's the Caddo Elder Center, and that's not a very good, but that detailing goes all the way around the building. That's a little better in the custom detail. Okay, for the Wichita Tribes History Center, we did a grass house abstraction at the front entry, and the front of the thing reflected a Wichita breastplate. And we had, in the interior design, which we also take into consideration, we had a wall of faces. The gallery referred to the 4 semi-cardinal directions, not the cardinal directions, because they observed the semi-cardinal directions. Do we have a photograph of that? Okay, here is this building. And they also constructed a lot of grass huts, and that was the grass detailing on the top of the arch. This was the interiors. We used cedar, fresh cut cedar, which is important to the tribe. And the Wichita had wonderful photographs. They had documented their tribal members really well, and we had a lot of information to work on with them also. This is a frame for the grass house that the Wichita originally lived in.
And it's not shown in these pictures, but there, as part of this project, and it was kind of unusual because it was a design-build project, but we set aside what's called an allowance and had I can't remember his name now, but there is a man from Norman that still knows the old ways, and he came out and the contractor hired Wichita youth as laborers, and they constructed a grass lodge and an arbor, like a summer arbor, which has open sidewalls, and it's used for cooking and things. And so in front of the museum are these 2 authentic grass structures that were built in a traditional way. I think it had about $10,000 worth of leather thongs in the construction, so you wouldn't think that things like leather thongs would be very expensive, but they add up when you do a construction project like that.
And they harvested the materials by hand for those also. It was an interesting project to work on. The Pawnee Nation College Dining Hall, this was the very first project that Barry and I worked on together. This was under Barrett Williamson Architects. This is what spurred us on to start our own tribal firm. The Pawnee Nation was a celestial tribe, and we wanted to do something that honored that. We were working with their former boarding school, and they had repurposed and reclaimed it to become the Pawnee Nation College. So from a point where they were assimilating children in these buildings that were historic, they had been reclaimed to educate their people in higher education. So we decided that maybe it would be good to, in the interior design, to reflect their history and their culture. We went up on a Saturday afternoon, and everybody in our office went, and we had a blue ceiling painted in a background, and we went through and hand painted the ceiling with the Milky Way and the celestial constellations that were important to the Pawnee Nation tribe. The specific patterns that we looked for were constellations that they would observe through the smoke hole of their lodges. They were also a tribe that observed the semi-cardinal directions, not the cardinal directions. And the 4
Does everybody know what semi-cardinal means? it's basically, instead of north, south, east, and west, it's northeast, southeast, southwest, and so on.
Yes, so it's on the WOMP, as we like to call it in the office. And the 4 posts inside of the lodge depicted that they were holding up the heavens, and those had a color that were associated with them. So we interpreted those in a tile floor. It was really interesting working on this project because we were not so far removed from when the Pawnee were relocated from the Platte River in Nebraska down to Oklahoma. They had a medicine bundle that contained a meteorite and a buffalo hide that depicted all of the constellations that were important to their tribe. And the elder that we were working with in Pawnee, his grandfather was the one that carried that from Nebraska to Oklahoma. The meteorite was too heavy to carry. They buried it and had a ceremony along the way. That buffalo hide now resides in the Field Museum in Chicago. This was one in our research. We did visit the Field Museum. Very good friendships were forged during this project, and we learned a lot about the Pawnee Nation. Here's photographs of the tile floor and the ceiling. And we work with tribes that will work with us, that want to give us their information. We do a cultural values workshop. There are a lot of tribes that have really strong cultural departments that will just give you the information that you need. Sometimes we work with our stakeholders and we ask them what they want inside of their building. So the focus of the workshop is to find out their values. We're interested in color palettes, material, building forms, symbols, beading patterns, pottery tools, and other things that are important. We request symbolism or ceremonial items that are not sacred that can be used in the building. We work with the history of the tribe, maybe their flag, because a lot of times they put important things on their flags. Colors and directions. Talk about medicine with them. And Barry will get into that in a little bit, along with the architectural forms and symbols. And then we also, when we do a cultural values workshop, if I've had to do research on my own, I always list my sources of where I have looked for this information. Because the last thing that a tribe wants is for someone that is not a citizen of their tribe to come in and try to interpret what it's like to be an Indian, especially if you're a white person that has no tribal affiliation. You need to be careful about and respectful and humble when working with tribes and ask them what is important to them, and don't assume. Okay, this was our Cheyenne and Arapaho cultural workshop of who we are, and I'm just going to blow through this because this is like where they came from, you know, what they grew.
This was our research.
This was my research. How they got there, and photos that I pulled out of the Smithsonian website, the Western History Collection website. Documented research. And these are the kind of things that we look for whenever we're working with a tribe. So you can see from the number of slides that I have that this is a lot of information that we're asking for. And in some form, some of this information we will take and we will incorporate it into the design.
again. This was a kickoff workshop, and so those last slides that you saw that had unanswered questions were things that we want them to affirm or not affirm our research, and then to add to it with their own stories and their own history and their own feeling of importance for things that we try to come in educated, but we also want them to educate us so that we get the story right. And we want to make sure we tell the right story, what's important to the tribes that we can express in our designs.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Barrett now. I'm just going to give him a plug because he graduated from OU way back before most of you were born, and he was the outstanding senior of his class.
I think that means I was outstanding in my some field somewhere. Just standing out.
Was it hard for you to break into this market?
You know, really, that first project, and I'll go into it in a little more detail, it was the Pawnee Nation College dining hall, and it's not used as a dining hall now, but that's what it was during the Pawnee Indian Agency boarding school. And that project, we just got so excited and inspired working with Todd Fuller, who was the dean of the college, who now I think he's at OU.
Of the Western History.
Yeah, he's director of Western History now, but he's an author. Had written about the Pawnee, and he's a big baseball fan. He wrote this book, 60 feet 6 inches from home, a story about a Pawnee professional baseball player named Moe's Yellow Horse. So, and Todd was non-native, but he was a super fan of the Pawnee culture. And then Muriel Rubidoux was the Indian Community Development Block Grant Administrator, and Buddy Lone Chief was the Vice Chairman at the time, and his grandfather was the one who carried that bundle to Oklahoma, and he helped us position the orientation of their star chart for a time of year, and one of their constellations is called the Swimming Ducks, and so we placed the swimming ducks on the ceiling in the springtime, which is what informed them on it's time to plant. So that project is really what spearheaded our pivot to really embrace this cultural relevance. So these are a couple of icons that we'll get into a little bit later. And Cheryl's already kind of gone through a lot of this. We've done 70 tribal projects since our inception 13 years ago, and worked with 19 governments. And the key to this is really to be culturally appropriate and to understand that each tribal nation is unique. So like I said earlier, this is where we started. And it started out, it was a historic preservation project. So there's a whole campus here called the Pawnee Indian Agency Boarding School that was built in the early 1900s. And it was based on the Carlisle school model, which was developed by, I can't think of his name now, Colonel Pratt. And the whole idea of the Indian boarding school was to kill the Indian, save the man. That was, you went there, you were not allowed to speak your language, they cut your hair off, and they tried to make you fit into the white person's philosophy of this box that you operate in. And so basically they were trying to kill the language, and it didn't work, thank goodness. And now, I call it a poetic irony, now this building is being used for Pawnee College and language preservation and cultural preservation. So it's great that we're using a tool that was initially meant to suppress culture to preserve culture. We talked a lot about the star chart, and you can see it on here. This was a kind of a presentation graphic when we floated the idea of, hey, let's express your culture in the ceiling. And so this was the star chart is on the right, and it's got that little ring around it with the months and such, but we didn't keep that, but we had that graphic handy, so we used that. And then over this, and these are now classrooms and offices. It's got like a distance TV, ITV learning classroom. It's got a lot of the same features as this room does, where they could do, and this was back in 2005, where they could do distance learning and things like that through through their affiliation with Oklahoma State University. Go Horse. We've already kind of seen this, but yeah, we went up one Saturday and painted these ceilings because we couldn't afford to get a specialty contractor in there or a muralist to come in there and do it. And so we had a lot of fun figuring out how to lay that out accurately. Typical design processes that you guys learn, is, programming, and, you develop your concepts and you create your solution. On a culturally based design process, there's a lot more to it. There's research, you ask questions, you listen to the answers, and listening is super important. Some tribes are reluctant to give information, and sometimes, and we have to respect that, and sometimes we'll give them written information and then we'll leave and let them talk amongst themselves and decide what they want to share with us, and then, at the next meeting, we'll take that information, and then that develops and kind of kicks off the dialogue. Because there are things to incorporate and there's things not to incorporate. So, what are symbols and meanings? And then we go into programming. So there's all these other steps that you could almost call like pre-design services. This was at Caddo Elder Center. This is a project that's almost finished, and I'm not knocking. This was a healthcare project, and it was through Indian Health Services, and they have their own architects, and they kind of developed the programming and the original planning documents, which they call it design intent documents, and so they gave us this. You can see on the site, their existing clinic is right here, and then we started out with an 11,000 square foot addition, and we're like, there's going to have to be ramps and stairs and all this stuff, because the original building is about 5 foot off the ground, and it was a modular building. It had 8-foot ceilings. We had to go in and sprinkle it and do all the, and upgrade the mechanical systems. It's like, it's not going to work. I'm like, why are we spending any money on this building to rehab it? Why don't we just make the new building 16,000 square feet? We'll build it, you can move into it, and then we'll come back and we'll tear that building down, and then in the future, if you have money, you can expand that direction. So they gave us this building with the north, top of the sheets north, no vestibule, pretty, not great waiting areas. It had nothing to do with Cheyenne Arapaho culture. So we rewired it, as Tim Allen would say, and that's probably too old for you guys. We used, one of the things that was important to the Cheyenne Arapaho was the east entry, and they were a teepee culture also. And so when they would set up their camps, the opening to the teepee would face east. So it's greeting the morning sun as it came up. And so we were able to develop an east entry with a north-facing building by locating the entry here. And then trying to balance design and budget and all those things, we developed this curvilinear facade. This basically got a bunch of rectangles around it. But the idea was that we were going to use a kind of a spoke pattern for the structure to evoke the TP poles kind of from a plan view. And we also express this in our flooring. So this is our terrazzo pattern, and it extends in through all the public areas, and then the other areas you're seeing are departments like primary care and administration and dental and all of that. We also did the same thing with paints. They have the way that they run their facility, and this was something that they gave to us in their exam rooms, which are here, here, and here. That they have spirit animals that they want to associate with, and so to the right we use this darker brown color to represent the bear. They have an eagle wing here, an otter wing here, and so paint colors were influenced by these spirit animals. And then again, like I said, we designed it for expansion, as you can see on the left and the bottom right. And this is the renderings of the project. And I wish it's even better than this. But, and you know, primary care where the nurses are, nurses stations. So before, because of COVID, knock on wood, before we were even finished with, and we're at the punch list phase on this right now. 3 months ago or more, they got some CARES Act money, and now we're doing a 6,000 square foot expansion that we're just beginning the design on. And so these were some of the conceptual drawings to develop that. And I didn't bring a floor plan, but one of the things that they didn't have, so they've got dental, they've got radiology, they've got physical therapy, they've got primary care, pharmacy, all of the things you would have in an ambulatory clinic. They did not have behavioral health, they didn't have audiology, they didn't have podiatry, and some other things. So the behavioral health ended up being in this part of the building. And one of the thoughts was to try and keep it looking as a unified building. They did, if you're in there and you're talking to a therapist, they didn't want a lot of windows to where people could see in or you could see out that much. They wanted to get natural light, but you know, there's a little bit of a stigma with mental health, and so we developed this different form. As you can see, so now this is the addition here, and so it's got these long vertical windows that allow natural light into the counseling rooms. And just a few other shots. I want to blow through this pretty quick. This is another project we're working on, and we're doing this with, we're actually partnered with ADG on this. This is a logo that we created in conjunction with the Muskogee Nation. And how many of you guys speak Muskogee? Wilitka, Wetumpka, Okmulgee, Muskogee, Tulsa. So we all speak Muskogee. Muskogee's really an ethnographic group that consists, and it was originally a confederation of tribal towns. Tulsa was a tribal town in Georgia. Okmulgee was a tribal town in Georgia. So there were like 60-some tribal towns, and each one was its own separate nation. but they were confederated and bonded through language. And so language is everything to the Muskogee, who were assigned the name Creek by the federal government due to their geographic location. So this is, on the right is the first Creek reader, which was an educational tool, and as you can see in the top center, that star. So that's one of the symbols that we used. We were at First Americans Museum, and we noticed this. It's called a counting stick. It's what you would use with the peg and the stick to keep track of what day it was. The mound, Okmulgee Mounds in Macon, Georgia, that represents engineering. And then the mortar and pestle represents technology, and that is, they used to take corn and lye and water and would mix it up and to soften the corn, and that's a chemical process. And so we're trying to find symbols from their history to represent the now and the future. So there's already 2 buildings on campus. These 2 buildings, and we were not involved in those. And interestingly enough, they are oriented on magnetic north axes. Our building is not. Our building is oriented on a true north axis. So, and I think one of the reasons they hired us to do the project, we talked about the pathway of the sun coming through the building. And with the east-west orientation being true east and true west, and we could take advantage and celebrate. The winter solstice is very important to them, as is the summer solstice. So we oriented the building and configured the exterior of the building to take advantage of that. I'm out of time almost. This is the west. As you can see, it's very opaque. This slot here is set up for sunset on the summer solstice. These floor patterns were derived, there's actually a skylight here, and I'll show you a little video. So when the sun, in the summertime, the sun's coming almost directly overhead and it follows this path. In the wintertime, when the sun's coming at an angle, it follows this path. And so we've got pathways for the summer solstice, or the summer equinox, the winter equinox, and the spring and fall, no, the spring and fall equinox, and the summer and winter solstice. So this is the west elevation. One of the things, the Okmulgee were mound builders. So we've got this curvilinear mound form that extends all the way into the facade. And then this is the slot that's like for the sun angles. And then this is the east side of the building, which faces into the plaza. And then this is an old image, but you'll get the idea. To teach the 5 values of the college, which is wisdom, respect, integrity, responsibility, and humility, we're going to be placing the Muskogee language vertically. So ignore this part right here. And then we're going to put the English language interpretation projecting out from the wall, so that as the sun comes up in the morning, it's going to cast the English translation onto the surface. And this, again, this was their logo, but just some ideas on how the interiors could look. And then you can see the oculus there with the sun tracing the path on the floor. And I will show this video and then be happy to entertain any questions. We've still got 15 minutes, so good. I can't see it on my screen, so. I don't know how to do this now.
Maybe click this like space bar.
Hmm?
If you click the space bar, sometimes it'll look like.
Okay. So this is the east, so the sun's coming up in the sky. Now you can see over there to the right, it tracing the path along the floor. When you see the flickering and things, those are the clouds. But this was done with Enscape. And with that, any questions? Yeah, don't all go once. Yes?
To get the light to basically trace on the floor, did you use a certain program for that, or was that just kind of a trial and error to see if you could get that skylight in the right spot?
We set it, well, there was quite a bit of work put into it. We set it up in Revit and then confirmed it in Enscape, and now we've got our civil engineers making sure that we've got our alignments just right.
So, Barry, could you just, this course is tools of practice, can you give us some explanation? How many are in your firm? Where are you? And then on the budget, do you come back and negotiate with them, or have you? And tell us about listening. Have you gotten better at listening?
Okay, first, well, there's 6 of us in the office currently. We've been up to 8 and down to 4, I think, over the last 20 years, and hopefully things are continuing on an upward trend. I say 6 plus Alexandra. So we're looking forward to her coming on board when she finishes up. I don't know. By nature, I am not a good listener. I'm a great speaker. I mean, I can talk for days. So it's really been a learning experience for me. There's sometimes I just want to jump, and I just have to just hold myself back and like bite my tongue. And I've found with clients that the better listener you are, the better able you are to assimilate and absorb what they're telling you so that you can respond to them and not make it about you.
I'm a very good listener, and we usually sit next to each other at meetings, and I'm kicking him under the table if he's not listening appropriately.
I've got the
Yeah.
bruises to show.
Yeah.
When designing for the different sovereign nations, do they all have different set of codes that you have to follow?
I'm sorry, can you?
Do they have different set of building codes than the normal, like, national ones?
Most of the tribes have adopted the international codes.
Okay.
So, as a matter of fact, I think maybe early in the 2000s, some of that was less common, but still, we designed to the codes because we felt like we had exposure if we didn't from a liability standpoint.
But there are differences, like the land could be trust land, and that's usually where casinos go, is on trust land. And there's fee simple lands.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting about Oklahoma history, and they don't teach it in high school, I mean, the Indians really got screwed. And if anybody's interested, there's a great book by one of our own, Angie DeBow, and the title of it is
Still the Waters Run.
And Still the Waters Run. And I think you guys have maybe seen or heard about Killers of the Flower Moon, atrocities that were committed against the Osage, but there were so many treaties that have been broken with the tribes. Tribes were forcibly removed here with the exception of about 3 of them. And in 1907, when Oklahoma became a state, for that to happen, the tribal lands had to be, the tribes had these big acreages, and they held the land communally. And so there was, somebody had this great idea that, hey, if we can get each tribal member 160 acres, then all the land that's left over after they each have their 160 acres, we can settle that land. And to give you a really crappy example of how some of that was parceled out,
we got the 160 acres, but it was divided into 80-acre parcels, and they were maybe 2 or 3 miles from each other. So back in the late 1800s, to traverse 2 miles, either by foot or wagon with farm implements, was nearly impossible to do. So the land would go up for sale. In my family, my uncle Mose Bruno had oil royalties on his land. Since he was a full-blood Native American, the government did not think that he was qualified to take care of his own business affairs. So the Bureau of Indian Affairs took care of the proceeds from the money that came from the oil royalties. He died in 1960 penniless, and the grocery store took his property because he owed them $36. He had, in today's value, over $70 million in a trust fund that had been mismanaged. So that is just one story, and that's just my family's story. Every Native family has a story of some injustice that happened, usually at the hands of the federal government.
so anyway, so all this happened, this allotment happened, and then the settlement happened, and then 1907 happened when Oklahoma gained statehood. When Oklahoma gained statehood, all the tribes essentially lost their sovereignty, which they lost property, they lost, they had schools, they had different facilities, and they were managed by the federal government. And this all started changing in the 70s. So
1948,
in
there was laws that happened in 1948. We, as Native people, were not able to vote in 1948. And it was not until, I believe in Oklahoma, it was the 50s before we were able to vote legally. Each state adopted, it, like the Civil Rights Movement, who they would allow to vote, and Native Americans, along with women and African Americans, were not able to vote.
So anyway, in recent history, a lot of the tribes have been reacquiring their former lands, and what they do, what they can do is called putting it into trust. So if they can consolidate an area of land and put it in trust, then that is part of their sovereign nation, and it is not governed by state or federal policies, and that's how the casinos came about, that they can operate a casino in Oklahoma when Oklahoma doesn't have gaming. So there's people that say, oh, the tribes get this, they get free health care, they get all this. I'm like, the tribes were intended to be eradicated. So that's just, and it has nothing to do with architecture, but it does have a little bit to do with when you work with tribes and you learn these stories, it's kind of embarrassing to know that our government had a big hand in this. So, any architecture questions?
I did a project a while back in Sealy, Oklahoma,
Yeah.
for city of Sealy. And anyway, I was there for a summer to look over, and they took me to land behind the high school and the elementary school. where all the tribes in the state of Oklahoma come together in the summer and put up TVs and interact. And I was so blown away that there was such collaboration between all these tribes.
And that's Cheyenne Arapaho country up there. Matter of fact, my mom's from Sealing.
Oh, really?
As is Gary English. Yes.
Well, this is kind of a two-part question, but like, at this point, you're very established as a tribal architecture firm. For the most part, when you're getting new jobs, are you going and approaching the tribes, or are they coming to you? And was this the case when you just started your firm, or has it changed?
Most of the tribes have a solicitation process, and especially if there's any federal funding involved. So like, I think we spoke about the Indian Community Development Block grants. There's other grants. Those grants are federal grants, and so they have to follow federal procurement regulations, which requires them to advertise and publish that, you know, for a request for qualifications. And so we pick some of those up. Some people call us and they say, hey, we've got an RFQ coming out. If you guys are, keep an eye out for it. And then other tribes have vendor lists that you can register with. Right now we're pursuing another really interesting project for the Cherokee Nation, and it's due Friday, and it's for rehabilitation of the historic Dwight Mission, which was a Presbyterian-run school for Cherokee children back in the day, and it does not have the negative connotations with it that, say, the Pawnee Indian Agency boarding school had. But it's over by that's kind of by Salisaw, and it's a 250-acre campus, and it's got like 12 buildings on it, 175 beds worth of dorms, that they're bunk beds, and has functioned over the last 40 or 50 years as like a summer camp run by the Presbyterians. And the Cherokee Nation recently acquired that and are wanting to redevelop that into a nationally recognized conference center with team building and lifeways, mentoring. So it's going to become a place for youth and adults in the future. And so that's got the historic aspect with it, but it's also got a lot of programming and master planning and market analysis. And so we've got this team that we've put together that are going to be telling us, you know, helping us to figure out who's our customer, what do we offer, you know, what's our regional draw, how can we make it as financially successful as possible. So it's not just architecture, it's kind of like development.
And a lot of our projects that are Indian Development Block grants, which we send proposals in, that's usually the selection process, are small. I mean, the award may be $850,000 or $900,000, and then the tribe has leverage that they put with that money. And so those may be just $1.3 million to $2 million projects, depending. So a lot of those are smaller projects.
And then the larger projects are a lot of times, some of the larger tribes that have done really well economically over the last 20 years are taking proceeds from businesses like Chickasaw Nation Industries. You know, they've got a big building, the old Saxon Publishing building down here on Highway 9. They've got DOD contracts, they've got, you know, they do all kinds, they're branching out into other things, not just gaming, but the proceeds from all these endeavors and economic diversity, they're taking the profits from those and plowing those back into ways to help their people. So like the Muskogee Nation is building a college, you know. Healthcare is huge, and there is some federal money available, but the tribes are putting in money. On that El Reno clinic, the tribe put in $5 million of their own money, and then the Indian Health Services put in another $3 million. So, you know, it's great seeing the tribes prosper in Oklahoma.
Yeah, another one of our projects, which you are probably familiar with, is the Casablanca Building, which is at the corner of Boyd and Jenkins. And it's a historic building that was repurposed into several things in its lifetime, but now it houses the Chickasaw Student Services Center at OU. And we worked with the Chickasaw students that were going to be the end users of the building about what they wanted the inside of the building to be. And so they wanted it to be a home away from home. So we chose comfortable furniture. We made places so that they could have classes for beading or making cultural items. And they've got a cultural library, workout space. The offices are housed upstairs in the building.
Laundry, gaming rooms, study areas,
Yeah.
living rooms, dining rooms.
We
And-
worked with a Chickasaw artist so that all of the art in the building is Chickasaw, old photographs from Chickasaw boarding school and graduations.
Thank you guys so much for coming today.
Well, thank you. Megwitch, thank
Yeah.
you.
Stay focused. And never give up. Yeah, that's, one thing I will tell you is not just architects, but as people, is people that are the most successful in life are the stubborn people that have stick-to-itiveness and just, no matter how many times you stub your toe, just keep trying and just keep going forward.